We were told that when we had a president, we'd see a giant global political figure, the man that would be the political leader for 500 million people, the man that would represent all of us on the world stage, the man whose job was so important that, of course, you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you?
I'll make one prediction this morning. The United Kingdom will not be the last member state to leave the European Union. So the question is, what do we do next? Now, it is up to the British government to invoke Article 50. And I have to say that I don't think we should spend too long in doing it. I totally agree, Mr Juncker, that the British people have voted. We need to make sure that it happens. But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to how we negotiate a different relationship. Now I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives, or worked in business, or worked in trade, or indeed ever created a job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Brisbane. What a fantastic hall this is, isn't it? I've spoken at venues all over the world. I don't think I've ever spoken in a more impressive auditorium, and what a fantastic city. This is in fact my first visit this week to Australia. I've never been here before. I wanted to come on the last two Ashes tours, but I thought, what's the point? The Aussies are going to beat us 5-0. We're going to get absolutely stuffed and humiliated. The Australian fans are going to know who I am, going to give me a hard time. So I didn't come because I thought you were a really, really great cricket team. Now we know why, don't we? Anyway, having risked that one early on, let me just say this to you. I am a completely accidental politician. I never intended to be involved in politics. I was in business. I left school at 18. I worked in the commodities business. I worked in the metals business, buying and selling copper, aluminium, or aluminum, as Donald Trump might say. A bit more of Donald later, perhaps. You never know. And I'd never intended to be involved in politics at all. But what I saw happening in my country were a group of people who had gone all to the same handful of schools, who had gone all to the same couple of universities, who'd taken the same degrees, who'd left university and become researchers in political offices, MPs in their late 20s, ministers in their middle, late 30s, and all that really motivated them was getting re-elected next time round. Career politicians. They spent their weeks together working in Westminster, their weekends socializing together. They married each other's sisters, and they couldn't really care less about the country, about their principles. They were about a career in politics. And I thought, the hell with that, because what they were doing is piece by piece, they were giving away our ability as the United Kingdom to make our own laws, control our own borders, run our own country, be a proper nation. And I thought, I'm going to fight back against these people. I'm going to fight back hard against these people. And unlike them, of course, I'd actually was able to say to the TV cameras that I'd worked for 20 years in the private sector, for 9 years running my own company. Unlike them, I could say hand on heart, I'd worked damned hard in the private sector up until lunchtime every single day. You may have seen the cartoons of me with a pint. Well, you know, we've all got our flaws, we've all got our faults. But something really fun is happening, and I'm pleased to say we're not suffering it here tonight in Brisbane, as Damien mentioned. But everywhere I go, everywhere Donald Trump goes, for anybody who believes in the nation state, who's not ashamed to be patriotic about their country, who believes that immigration control matters, who believes that Judeo-Christian principles underpin everything in our society. Everywhere speakers like that go, they are met and confronted by protesters. Now, we've had them in Perth, we had them in New Zealand last night, we're going to get them in Sydney tomorrow night, and God knows what they're preparing in Melbourne for us. I just don't know. But let's just examine for a minute what is going on. Why are people out there shouting on the streets, holding up slogans and banners? You know, I've been called an eccentric, a raving lunatic, a racist. Oh, I'm a homophobe as well. That's important. I nearly forgot that one. I'm transphobic. I mean, there's almost no form of abuse that has not been thrown at me for just wanting to believe that we should all have our own nation states, trade together and be friends with each other. Well, it may well be that some of these people out there are modern-day Trotskyites, that what they really want is for us to have one world government, one world currency, and I guess for them, the European Union is the prototype. It's perfect, isn't it? Think about how it makes its laws. The unelected European Commission have the sole right to make legislation. We can't vote for them, we can't remove them. And that, I think, for some of these protesters, is the way they want us to live. But for more of them, I'm afraid there's something going very badly wrong. And it's happening in Britain, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in America, it's happening right across the Western world. Through our university system, we have a group of lecturers and professors that are poisoning the minds of our youth. They really, really are. It's Hillary saying Donald Trump has sunk to the depths. He got the racist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic, I mean, a long list, and Nigel Farage along. This proves that Trump is desperate. And at 1 minute, Hillary Clinton had made me a figure in the US presidential election. Thank you, Hillary, thank you, thank you. So I kept going back. I kept going back through the campaign. I attended the debates, and I kind of became part of the spin team supporting Trump. And Trump won that amazing victory, didn't he? Amazing, amazing victory. And that was the moment I realized that Brexit was not an isolated event. Brexit was the beginning of a great global political revolution. Trump won, and look at what's happened ever since then. Just look at what's happening in Italy with Matteo Salvini standing up and saying, we will not take unlimited numbers of migrants across the Mediterranean. We will defend our way of life. We will defend our culture. And he's right, isn't he? And it's happening in Germany, where the Alternative for Deutschland is now the second-place party. There are elections taking place this coming Sunday, and they'll happen in Sweden, where again, Eurosceptic parties that believe in a nation state will make massive progress. And I want to say this to you folks. Whenever you see these protests, hear these horrible things being said, see the negativity through mainstream media, remember this. They're doing it because they're losing. We are winning. We are getting there. Now, short term, that may feel a bit awkward here in Australia, because I left the country mired in political crisis, internecine warfare going on within our established political parties. I came to Australia to get a break from it. It hasn't really worked out very well, as you've been through 7 premiers over the course of the last 11 years. And people think, well, it's unlikely that a great political revolution will take place here in Australia. But actually, look at the arguments. Look at the dividing lines of debate. What are people talking about? They're talking about Australia's immigration policy, a policy, by the way, that many of us had admired hugely for decades, but which in the course of the last few years appears to have lost its direction, appears to have lost its understanding of what it used to be. You've got the debate going on in this country over renewable energy. The fact that your taxpayers and your manufacturers are expected to pay to make the rich even richer. You've got the argument going on here over Paris, where one government can make a decision that binds others. So actually, unless your mainstream political parties start to reflect that, then I think you may well see a political revolution and new exciting things happening in Australia too. I really, really do. We're living through the most fascinating period of time in Western politics there possibly could be. For my part, I almost can't believe it. I almost have to pinch myself that a cricket-loving middle-class boy from Kent has kicked off this revolution that has got the socialists and that has got the globalists and has got the big businesses and the big banks in such a state of lather. They seem to absolutely hate me, but I was told years ago by my old headmaster at school, be judged in life by your enemies. And if Hillary Clinton is my mortal enemy, I must be getting something right. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And a fine Cabernet Sauvignon, Nigel, from
Cheers, everybody.
2017. Okay. So today, Nigel and I and Peter and a couple of others went to lunch, and I spent 2.5 hours on the phone dealing with police, and it was actually quite funny, and Nigel was in stitches most of the time, at least I thought he was, because Peter was cutting up my meat and feeding it to me so I could actually have my phone like that. But we're living in an age where my lunch is interrupted because left-wing protesters who think Nigel is responsible for the Aboriginal genocide are coming to protest tomorrow night. Does this happen in the UK?
We do get it in the UK. I have to say, it seems to me that maybe protesting has become a bit of an Australian national sport. They seem to be particularly heavily organised in Melbourne. Look, I mean, to protest, to disagree with somebody is fine. But actually what we had the other night happening both in Perth and in Auckland were protesters abusing members of the public who were coming into these meetings. And their object isn't to protest. Their object is to stop people like me coming here and spreading our message. Their object is to close down free speech. And we've got to close ranks on this, folks. We really, really have.
So we've had, for those of you that don't know, and we've done a couple of these shows, we've had to change venues. I think there's another promoter in the audience tonight, Dave Pellowe from Axiomatic, who brought out Lauren Southern recently. A big round of applause for Dave. Where are you, Dave? Doesn't matter, I can't see him. But, you know, it's a real issue. And what's happening is the left is, or the protesters, or whatever you want to call them, they're basically going to the venues, or they're calling the venues up. They're putting pressure on them, And then the police are complicit, because what's happening is the police are thinking to themselves, well, we don't want to have to deal with this. So then the police, especially in Victoria, they ring the venues and they say, oh, look, you're going to get a lot of protesters. We don't recommend this. And so the venue cancels. And so we've sold all these tickets to good people like yourselves, right? And then we have to refund or move, and it's an absolute bitch. Pardon my French.
So why is Brisbane so much more sensible than the other Australian cities? That's what I want to know.
Good question. George, I'm going to put you on the spot, mate. You want to answer that?
We're different in Queensland.
You are different in Queensland. So no, it is a real problem. And we Nigel, I think we spoke about this the other day. We've got every year for Australia Day, we have this change the date campaign. You know, let's make it May 8 because it's mate. Right? No significance whatsoever. I live in Sydney. They desecrate the statues. They want to rip down Captain Cook's statue because he was complicit in the genocide. I mean, it is an absolute nonsense. And we're seeing it in America, and we're seeing it here. And frankly, and this not you, George, but there is very little leadership from our political leaders. And we just keep going through them in terms of prime ministers because no one actually wants to deal with this.
Yeah. I must say, this whole trend to attempt to rewrite history, you might have seen in America, they tore a statue down of General Lee, and it's happening elsewhere. And we've had campaigns in Oxford University to get rid of statues of Cecil Rhodes, and we all want to apologise for everything that went before us. We want to judge how our forebears lived through the prism of what's considered acceptable today. And you know, you can't rewrite history. Maybe what you can do is learn from history.
Correct.
You know? And I don't go along at all with all these apologies, although I will say this. What we, the United Kingdom, did to you in Australia back in 1973, when we turned our backs on our best friends in the world, we joined the common market, we made it tough for you guys to sell us your produce. That is an historical wrong that I'm not going to apologise for, but with Brexit, we're going to be free and able to get our relationship back with Australia to where it ought to be.
Tell me, what I want to know is, in the wake of the abject failure of a referendum to achieve a result that the people wanted, even though the result was clear, the Parliament has essentially ignored the will of the people. What is the way that, without an executive branch like America has, there's not really much hope for people in Australia or the United Kingdom hoping for a Trump? What is the power that the people have to actually change things in our Westminster kind of democracy?
Well, it's not over yet. I mean, look, you know, it's absolutely right to say that the whole Brexit thing's been diluted, delayed, watered down, but we still have D-Day on the 29th of March next year. I still think that if the public hold strong and make their views felt to their MPs, we can still get over that line and leave. Now, it may be a very weak Brexit, but I tell you what, Brexit of any kind and leaving those treaties as well. So it's not quite as bad as you think. I mean, the answer to your second question is that, well, look, you know, I stood up on my own, took on a system that looked to be impossible to oppose, and achieved my goals. The real answer is, you know, as Edmund Burke said back in the 18th century, all it takes for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. So if you believe in stuff, get involved, get active, and keep pushing the arguments.
Is there a practical suggestion you would have for the average person who's perhaps bemoaning the unrepresentative nature of Parliament, the corruption, the ignorance, the careerism of politicians? What can the average person actually do? Obviously, we can't have 25 million Australians in Parliament. What can they do as people who perhaps feel they've got no political skills or giftings?
Well, they need organisations that you know they can attach themselves to. And the one thing politicians fear is a collective group of people who are active online, physically knocking on their office door, constituency door, and saying, you know, unless you start to listen to us, we're not going to vote for you. So there are lots of ways that you can influence what politicians do. Ultimately, and it is difficult, in these systems. There's no question about that. It's hard, but ultimately, if politicians continue to ignore the will of the people, new parties will emerge. And I think, my observation here is there's quite a big gap developing in Australian politics that somebody will fill. And Trump doesn't grow on trees, and I understand that. But nature hates a vacuum. In the end, a vacuum gets filled.
What would your advice be to Scott Morrison, as he's now stepped into this gap? Maybe the revolving door, we hope, of leadership in Australia is going to slow down. What would your advice be to fill the gap that certainly people right of Stalin are looking for?
It's tough for him, of course, because he's got competing wings of his own party. My view would be, if he carries on a course of trying to please both wings of his own party, he risks, in the election next May, losing and something really quite bad happening. Let's see. He's certainly socially quite conservative. How that manifests itself, I don't know. But if he's bold, and he steps and he moves the party into the vacuum, he won't take all his friends in Parliament with him. Hey, that's life. But you know what? If he takes the country with him, suddenly the parliamentary numbers get easier. So I think he's going to be bold, and I think the Liberal Party needs to have a much clearer identity than it's had here for a long, long time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time tonight, and thank you for coming to Australia, and we hope to see you again soon.
I'm loving it. Can't wait.